Greetings, my dear friends. This is Chax once again with a new episode of Chax Simplifies. While keeping ourselves within our immediate neighborhood, let's take up a country which is known as the graveyard of empires, the country of Afghanistan. What I will cover in the next few minutes is a quick introduction to Afghanistan, talk about its geopolitical imperatives, the recent history, including, you might have heard this term before, the Great Game, India's interest in Afghanistan, and the interest of other nations that have stakes in Afghanistan, and where do we go from here. Very, very quickly, Afghanistan is a landlocked country in South Asia. It has borders with China, Pakistan, Iran, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan. An area of 6.5 lakh square kilometers, a population of approximately 3.4 crores. Geographically, has three major areas: the highlands, the northern plains, and the southwest plateau. Mountains and rivers, dear friends, are the most dominant geographic features, and the rivers obviously are fed from the Hindu Kush mountains, right in the center, running at a southwesterly angle, dividing the country into roughly half. Four major cities: the capital Kabul in the east, Kandahar in the south, Herat in the west, and Mazar-e-Sharif in the north. A huge amount of population stays in the hinterland, in small villages and kasbahs, for want of a better word. The location of Hyderabad at the crossroads of the Middle East, Central Asia, and the Indian subcontinent has historically invited significant external actors into Afghanistan. It's the bridge between the landlocked, energy-rich Central Asia and the energy deficient South Asia, which has access to the Indian Ocean. Therefore, Afghanistan's primary challenge is how it can resist the intervention from outside players. How can it maintain authority over a largely agrarian, rural society spread across very thinly a rugged landscape? How can it have a central authority versus various warlords and ethnic and regional identities that form a part of the Afghan milieu? It's an amalgamation of diverse languages, cultures, and ethnicities, depending on which country borders it. The Pashtuns constitute about 42% of Afghanistan's population. The Tajiks, about 27%. The Hazaras, 9%. The Uzbeks, another 9%. The Amak, Turkmen, 4% each. Baloch, about 2%. And the rest of the nationalities are even smaller than this. Each of these nationalities have intense, violent relationships with the other ethnicities, and some of these go back not decades, not generations, but centuries. The borders of modern-day Afghanistan were drawn in the 19th century as a part of the Great Game, or as a result of the Great Game, between the British and the Imperial Russian Empire. Therefore, it was meant to carve out a space between these two empires. That Great Game we will cover a little lately, and we do know that the Great Game is still on. The most contentious boundary is with Pakistan, and it is called the Durand Line. Pakistan and Afghanistan have a major dispute here. Afghanistan claims the Durand Line is drawn very, very arbitrarily, and it should actually absorb the Pakistan's Pashtun majority area. But then that would include the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and Peshawar. Naturally, this fuels antagonism between the two and plays a role in the Afghanistan's broader challenge of asserting sovereignty as far as over the outside actors that advance their own interests. Let's talk a little bit of history because you cannot reach where we are today without delving a little into the past. From the British to the former Soviet Union, the United States, Afghanistan has been a showcase of warlordism. There is an absolute lack of central government authority, well, read Kabul here, and its control over the peripheral areas, major ethnic discord and distrust, tribal hostility and feuds, a culture of retribution and vengeance, societal polarization and disharmony. No wonder it was always called the graveyard of empires. Whether it was Genghis Khan or the British, the Soviet Union, and now the US, none of them, really speaking, have been able to keep Afghanistan under their control for any significant period of time. While we stick on to the recent history, let me remind you of a very interesting fact. Every attack on India from the past has always happened from the Afghanistan, Khyber Pass, Peshawar, Indus axis. Whether it was the Alexander or Muhammad Ghaznavi, the Mongols, the Mughals, or even Nader Shah, they all came through this axis. They really couldn't come from the south part through the Balochistan because the Indus River was a huge, virtually an ocean which was impossible to cross. Therefore, for us, Afghanistan remains a very, very important country to study, to know, and understand. Because of its geography, the Afghans have largely governed themselves for centuries, essentially on ethnic and tribal basis. They never had a concept of a central authority. Ahmad Shah Durrani is supposedly or considered to be the founder of the modern day Afghanistan somewhere in 1747. The Durrani Empire ruled till 1826 and were defeated by Ranjit Singh and driven north of the Hindu Kush. The rise of Dost Muhammad, who founded the Barazakzai dynasty, and he very intelligently played the Imperial Russia and the Britishers, who were both trying to dominate the center part of the Asian continent, all right, to ensure Afghanistan became strategically very important. It took 4 wars between the Britishers and the Russians, and of course the Afghans playing their own role in the middle, to leave Afghanistan largely self-ruled but a British protectorate. Mackinder had proposed what he called as the Great Game. He who rules the heartland commands the world island. This world island was Eurasia. Who rules the world island commands the world. Great. Imperial Russia, just think of it as a reasonably large landlocked country. Why? To the north is the frigid Arctic Sea or Arctic Ocean. To the east, well, nothing really much there. It was Alaska and again frozen seas that side. To the west was land, its borders with Europe, and south, Afghanistan, China, no access to the open seas of the Indian Ocean. Britain, on the other hand, was flexing its muscles as a part of its setting up of its own realm, if you will, the kingdom, or as they said, the British Empire, where the sun never set. And therefore, starts the Great Game. The Imperial Russia wants access to the south, to the warm waters of the Arabian Sea and the Indian Ocean thereafter so that it could command the world. And the British wanted to expand their own empire. They commanded the seas. Therefore, from the First Anglo-Saxon War of 1838 to the last of them in 1878, 4 wars were fought on and around Afghanistan. And finally, Afghanistan, like I said, became a British protectorate. The second phase of the great game is on today, where you have the US on one side and Russia-China axis on the other. The imperatives, the geopolitical imperatives, remain broadly the same. China and Russia wanting access into the warm waters of the Arabian Sea and the US denying it. Right? But we'll come to this in a while. The Kingdom of Afghanistan broadly was set up by Muhammad Zahir Shah in 1926. He was deposed on the 17th of July 1973 by Muhammad Daud Khan. In 1978, Daud was assassinated and was replaced by the communists, who established the Democratic Republic of Afghanistan. Come 1979, the Soviets came to the aid of the communists who were in power in Afghanistan, and that started the Afghan-Soviet or the Soviet-Afghan War. The US rushed aid to counter this. The birth of Taliban and the resultant anarchy that happened, leading to finally the withdrawal of the Soviet Union in 1989, 10 years later. Well, from 1992 to 1996, there was an Islamic state which was set up in Afghanistan. Lots of strife, not much of peace, there are whatever you call it. But in 1996, the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan was established, which was led by the Taliban. It was these Taliban who destroyed the Buddhist statues in Bamia. Right? In 2001, the Taliban was overrun by the US and the Northern Alliance, led by Masood, to establish the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. It took them a little time to come up with a new constitution, and elections were held. Hamid Karzai was parachuted into Afghanistan, and he became the president of Afghanistan in 2004. Elections were held every 5 years, and in 2009, Karzai was the president of Afghanistan once again. Whilst the constitution was broadly in line with the limitations as laid down in the US constitution, Karzai could not have come back into power in 2014, and Ashraf Ghani became the president. Ghani was declared president once again on the 18th of Feb 2020 by the Election Commission, post-elections in 2019. Large-scale rigging was sadly suspected. The people not too happy, yet Ghani is the president. So, is there an end game for all the fighting and strife in Afghanistan? Well, yes. The US certainly realized that it's in a place where victory is not an option. Therefore, it held peace talks with its biggest enemy, the Taliban. These were held in Qatar at Doha, and on 29th of February 2020, the US agreed to pull out of Afghanistan in a period of 14 months. It agreed to supervise the release of prisoners both by the Afghan government and the Taliban. The Taliban promised that it will not allow ISIS to make any inroads, and it would negotiate with the Afghan government on a deal which would bring in a new constitution, new elections, and a new government. Essentially, the Taliban made no commitment. Not surprisingly, the Afghan government rejected this entire peace deal on the 1st of March as the Afghan government was never a part of this peace process. However, the UN Security Council showed great alacrity in accepting this on the 10th of March. Sadly, the deal came unstuck. The exchange of prisoners did not take place. Talks continued and they failed on the 7th of April and therefore made or led Taliban to commence its activities of attacking the government forces all over again. Talks in the new constitution got stalled over what will be the shape of the new government, and women's rights. Yes, women's rights. Fighting has recommenced and an offensive has been resumed by the government of Afghanistan on the 13th of May. Well, so let's come down to India's interest and the other stakeholders' interest, pausing history for a moment. Well, India has historical connects with Afghanistan. These are civilizations that were between India and the south of Afghanistan, dating as far back or even older than the Indus Valley civilization. The Mauryan, the Kushan empires, Kanishka, you would probably remember him more than anybody else, were in the south of the Hindu Kush. Hinduism and Buddhism spread in Afghanistan, and there are numerous temples and Buddhist stupas, statues all over Afghanistan. Don't forget, the 6th century sculptures of Bamia were destroyed by the Taliban in March 2001. Kabuliwala is an interesting tale and a favorite icon as far as our children are concerned. And don't forget, India signed among the early friendship treaties in 1950 with Afghanistan with Zahir Shah, who was the king of Afghanistan at that moment in time. India has significant security interests here. India is very wary of the Taliban-Pak axis. What will be the role of the Afghan trained fighters in Kashmir? How will Pakistan use them? India wants to restrict the Pak influence in Afghanistan and deny Pakistan anything called strategic depth. It is good if Pakistan is busy on its western front with the Taliban and Afghanistan so that it does not have as much time to devote to the eastern front. The Golden Crescent, which is basically an axis of Pakistan, Iran and Afghanistan, which account for a very large portion of the drug mafia across the globe. India also wants to prevent the ISIS from using Afghanistan as its outpost for entry into India. To achieve this, India has been training military and civilian police personnel in Afghanistan for a significant period of time now. Afghanistan is home to about $3 trillion worth of mineral wealth, from iron ore to lithium, chromium to natural gas, petroleum. It is the bridge to the oil and mineral rich Central Asia. Don't forget, India imports over 80% of its fuel needs. Therefore, the importance, you can imagine, of Afghanistan. Chabahar port in Iran is to be our bridge to Central Asia via Afghanistan. India has an airbase in Tajikistan at Fakor to project power in Central Asia. India has significant people-to-people connect in Afghanistan. It has an embassy in Kabul, consulates in Herat, Jalalabad, Mazar-e-Sharif and Kandahar. Its trade and investments are upwards of $3 billion. It is the largest donor from Asia. Yes, largest donor from Asia. The 5th largest globally. Most of its activities are restricted to the areas of health, education, water, heavy industries, transportation. a bilateral trade of over $1.5 billion, most of it in India's favor. It has constructed highways in Afghanistan, established 2 air corridors to facilitate bilateral trade. It actually reconstructed the Salma Dam in the Herat province and has constructed the new parliament complex in Afghanistan. Okay, so that is India. Let's look at the other players here. Most important, the United States. You remember I did say the US realized lately that victory was never an option for the US. The Taliban is not fighting to win. The US has paid a very heavy price with over 2,400 people dead, over $3 trillion spent. However, it had no clear objectives, it has no clear idea of what the end state that it desires. It is seeing a dwindling power in the Middle East. Iran and its nuclear ambitions are keeping the US totally occupied. Iraq has ordered withdrawal of US forces. To balance its interest, it has forced to maintain 2 carrier task force in the Persian Gulf. To the south is a nuclear yet very fragile Pakistan. It wants to cut and run, would like to cut and run. Sadly, it can't do neither. Because you have an aggressive Russia and China ensuring the US has very few options except containment. It therefore finds itself in support of an Islamic government of the Taliban. Its presence will be leaner, probably meaner, but it cannot allow Afghanistan to become the game of BUZKASHI. There's an old game in Afghanistan of coat grabbing by horsemen. Take China. For a long time, China considered of little strategic importance. But today, China is an observer in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Well, rise of Afghanistan, right? Islamic fundamentalism is a problem as far as China is concerned, whether it is Uyghurs or the Turks. It wants to reconstruct the Silk Route, and initially the alignment was bypassing Afghanistan so that it could control Central Asia. But today, it is already connecting Afghanistan with the CPEC, that's to China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, with 2 special railway projects. The discovery of oil and minerals have sparked economic interest in China. China has differences in what the state of Afghanistan will be once the US withdraws, and the role of Pakistan and Taliban. It feels it can control or dominate Afghanistan through its proxy, Pakistan. Pakistan always dreamt of a strategic depth. Look at the map of Pakistan. It's like a sausage, long yet narrow. At the broadest, it's about 250 kilometers. Therefore, it always dreamt of a depth, and it wanted to incorporate Afghanistan into its strategic depth. If there is peace on the western frontier, Pakistan will get more army to be deployed eastwards towards India. It has always been following the policy of diplomacy by other means to keep India in check, and therefore Taliban. It's in favor of TTP, Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan. But Taliban recently has started showing a lot of independence and definitely a much more mature global outlook. Pakistan is desperate for financial and military aid. It is playing China versus Russia versus the United States, and is predominantly leaning in favor of China. Its bargaining chips essentially are 2: the nuclear weapons and its geography, you can't really approach Afghanistan without Pakistan. On the other side is Iran. Iran was always suspicious of the Afghan Taliban, who are basically Sunni, versus Iran's Shia. Iran had backed the Northern Alliance led by Masood at one time, but the Taliban attacked the Iranian consulate in Mazar-e-Sharif in August 1998, killing 10 diplomats. Since then, it has bridged its gap with the Taliban and wants a role in Afghanistan. Essentially, it has one problem, one big problem: water. Iran's water largely comes from Afghanistan, and there's always already a dam on the Hari River at Salma, and there's a proposal to dam the Helmand River. Therefore, Iran is looking for water security. Well, we've been talking about great game and great game 2. How can we forget Russia? Russia has a long history. The imperialistic Russia played the great game 1. Soviet Union got itself a bloody nose in the 1980s and considered Afghanistan as the incubator of international terrorism. What Russia needs is a stable, predictable, geopolitically neutral Kabul or Afghanistan. An Afghanistan that will not give a safe haven for international terrorist group. Well, read Islamic groups and obviously read people from Chechnya and other countries in the border of Afghanistan and Russia. It wants to put a stop to drugs and arms trafficking. It wants to neutralize the Chinese influence in Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and other Central Asian republics. Its own intervention in Syria makes Russia very wary of ISIS, and therefore the Taliban, because both ISIS and Taliban are Sunni groups. It wants to maintain itself a role through the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, where Afghanistan has an observer status and has been spearheading some parts of the dialogue with the Taliban in what is called as the Moscow format of talks. So, what is the situation today? On one end, you have the US wanting to pull out and signing a deal with the Taliban on the 29th of Feb this year. The presidential elections in the US keep the focus entirely inward as far as the US is concerned. Pakistan is very happy with Taliban in center stage and the fact that India has been kept out of the peace process. China is very happy because it has influence with Pakistan and therefore it feels it has access to the Afghan minerals. Russia is trying to ensure it has a role and its leverage with Taliban and other insurgent groups through the Moscow format of talks. Iran has leverage and fears, from water security to the growth of terrorism through the ISIS or the Taliban, which are Sunni groups. Taliban is smelling victory. It has gained world recognition and support. But the government in Afghanistan, led by Ashraf Ghani, is very anxious. It sees its future very uncertain. And an uncertain future in Afghanistan means death. India is again very wary from the Taliban's involvement in Kashmir or possible involvement in Kashmir to what happens in Afghanistan once the US withdraws and the role of Pakistan. The basic question here is, are Afghans themselves tired of the fighting that is going on? Now that is a question which I really don't have an answer. Afghanistan, or the Afghans, proudly proclaim their land as graveyard of empires. Yet they forget that for centuries they have been burying their own kith and kin through internal discords and competing interests. a culture of revenge. Foreign powers playing a role, and therefore they have developed what is called as the rentier concept. They are very happy renting their land and their people to foreign powers to fight and die. Ethnic conflicts, tribal rivalries have not only kept Afghans dependent on these foreign powers, their mutual acrimony and distrust impedes any peace process. Therefore, I don't really see a true peace in Afghanistan unless the different Afghan ethnicities reconcile among themselves. Is that happening? I doubt it. But the recent COVID 2019 has initiated a new Cold War. A Cold War between US on one side and China on the other. How will that play out? It's early days yet to give you any concrete view. But yes, Afghanistan, I don't see losing its status, its strategic status, as the center of the geopolitical world in South Asia. The new great game is on. China, Russia, Iran, Pakistan, all trying to dominate on one side to have a decisive say. The US and the Western powers on the other. Afghanistan is in turmoil. All Afghan countries with vested interests are playing the game of BUZKASHI. You remember the game of goat grabbing? Well, goat grabbing is on, or Afghan grabbing is on in this game in Afghanistan. We continue to live in very interesting times, my dear friends. Do like, comment, and forward this video to your friends. And yes, please don't forget to subscribe and keep yourself updated. And before I sign off, I have received a few requests to start a new series that could trace the origins of some interesting terms and traditions. As a first, I trace the origins of the tradition of clicking glasses and saying cheers. I have placed a link to that video in the description box below, and I'm sure you'll like it. Thank you very much. Have a great day.